Hello and welcome and thank you for joining me. Today we're going to look into a flow use case, and this was a request from one of my viewers in showing how to create a order line items copied from the quote line items. So if you're not familiar with these objects, please check out my Sales Cloud video where I go over the opportunity object, quote and order and contract and all of the things that you probably should know about if you're dealing with Sales Cloud and the sales process. Just as a high level, I have an opportunity here. I can add products to the opportunity through the opportunity line item object, that is a junction object. And then you can create codes, various codes that you send out to your customers, and the code that you finalize will also have quote line items that can be synced from the opportunity line. So every quote object also has quote line items that is synced from the opportunity line item. And then once you have the code finalized or approved, then that's where usually in the process we've got to create order if that applies to your use case. And then generally when you create an order, that will have order line items. And the question or the use case we're trying to solve for is how to sync quote line items directly to the order line items. So just to show you, I'm going to just create an order real quick. Use a contract that I have signed. So the contract is also tied to this quote. I'm just going to use an active contract, and I'm going to start the order right here and save. So that's my order. And once I create the order products are not automatically added. And the requirement here is we just want to sync all the line items from our quote into this order, so we don't have to manually add it. All right, so for this, we're going to use a record triggered flow, and I'm going to go very slow. And if you want, you can follow along. So go to your setup and find your flow screen. I'm going to use a record triggered, but if you wanted the users to control how to and when do they want to generate order, you can also create a screen flow for this. Really depends on your use case. Let's do record triggered flow. So for this scenario, I'm going to assume that I want to fire this automation when a code is updated to approved status. So I'm going to do code here, and the record is updated. And the requirement for me is that the status is approved. And I'm going to say only when the record is updated. And I'm going to choose actions and related records because I'm going to deal with lots of related records for this code. If I were to just update a field in a code, I could just use fast field updates. And when you're working on a project, I highly encourage using asynchronous path. That just saves you some CPU time because that will perform asynchronously, especially if you don't need it to be in real time. For this example, we're just going to uncheck it. The moment you check it, you'll see you'll have an asynchronous option in the screen or run immediately. So I'm going to uncheck that just for this example, and we're going to save this first of all. And now I'm just going to start adding some elements. So the first thing I want is I want to query that quote line item. So I'm going to use get records for that. The reason I'm querying the quote line item because I need to know what products were added and the product IDs and stuff. Here I'm just going to say quote line item, and my condition for this is quote ID, that's the parent, equals the flow that's fired, so record dot ID. So here I'm saying give me all the child quote lines for this quote ID, and I want all the records. Then I also will need contract. As you saw when I was creating that order, I also need to have contract. So I'm going to query that as well. Another get record, and this time I'm going to query contract. And for this example, I'm actually assuming that I'm also going to create the order from this flow. Your scenario might be different. You may or may not need to create order. Your requirement might be that you wanted to create the order line items once the order is added. I am assuming that the moment the code is approved, you want to create order and order line items both using this flow. So I'm going to query contract here, not to be confused with contact. And so for contract, we're going to say, give me the contract where account ID is equal to quote dot account ID. Make sure it's the active contract. Status equals activated. And you might have other scenarios because we just want to make sure we only get one contract. And I'm assuming in this scenario, the account only has one active contract. So I'm just querying activated. And I'm only going to limit it to one record because I only really need one contract. So for real examples, you might need to dig more into this, how you're going to get the contract. Okay, so we've got the contract, we've got the quote line. Now we know we're going to create order. So I'm going to hit plus and create records. And we're going to create order because we need the order ID to be able to create the order line items. I'm going to say I need to manually create this order start date. We can start it at the quote date, or we can also start it on the contract start date. So maybe we do that contract query, and I'm going to say whenever the contract is starting, that's when I want the order to start. Then status, let's just say draft. And I also need account ID for the order. I'm going to give it the account ID that we got from this quote. So the quote also has an account ID. Just want to make sure all the things are linked correctly. Okay, so we got order. Now make sure you check this box to manually assign variables. And what we're doing here is once the order is created, we want to store the order ID. So I'm going to create a new resource. I'm going to call it text, where order ID, data type is text, and that's it. So we're creating an order ID, we're storing it here. Okay, so now you created the order. So next we're going to create the order line item. Now order line item will be multiple lines because normally one quote will have multiple lines and we want to try to sync that over to order. So what you're going to do is use a loop. So anytime you're trying to create multiple records in Flow, you can either use loop or transform. I'm going to use loop for this example. I haven't really played around with transform as much yet, but there are some additional functionality that is coming up with the new release. I'm going to say use a loop here. So what are we looping through? We are going to be looping through the quote line items, the one that we just created or queried. And when you click here, it will bring all the collection variables that are available in your flow. Since I only have one, that's the option I get, and that's it. So I'm looping through this. And what do we want to do once we loop through it? Well, usually the purpose of looping through something is to get the values and assign it to certain things that you need. So here I'm going to say I want to create an assignment. So I'm going to create assign order line item variable. So first we're going to assign individually to one single variable. New resource, you're going to do a variable and you're going to say var single order line item. So this is a single order line item. Okay. And the data type here is going to be record. When it's not a multiple, it's a single. So I'm not going to check that. And I'm going to say order line, or rather it's called order item. That's the actual API name of the object. Sorry about that. And so yeah, I just created a resource. Now I need to actually define the values for each field. So the moment you create a record type variable, you can come in here and start typing your record that you just created, var single only. And these are all the fields. So you can see that there's really not many fields for the order line record, which is great, makes it easy for us. So obviously you need the parent order ID. So I'm going to click on this equals. And what would we use here? Exactly, the order ID that we just created. So I'm gonna look for that. I just created the var order ID. So that's my order ID. Add another assignment. Add other fields that we need. We will also need the product ID. We can get that from the quote line. So you can click on current item from quote line, product ID here. Okay. So we got the quote line dot product ID. What else fields we need? Let's see. So var single line, and we also need to give it a price book entry ID. You can just use whatever we have for the quote. In this case, I only have one price book. Price book is a different concept, but every time you add a product, you need to have a price book. Generally, we can just have one price book, but you might need more depending. So I'm going to use the price book entry ID from the quote line. I think those are pretty much all the fields you need. If we get errors, we'll come back to it. And then next thing we need to do, so now that you have gone through the quote line looping and assigning everything one by one, you also need to add another assignment. And you might wonder, why are we adding another assignment? Why is this not enough? So think about, like, you took a file and you're going through each paper. You're taking one paper and putting it separate. You're taking one paper, putting it outside of. So if you keep replacing the same paper, you're not really ever gonna get through the file. Or even if you get through the file, you're just gonna end up with the last paper. You're not stacking it on top of each other. You add an assignment like a bucket. So you're just moving paper from one file and adding it to a different file. So this is your new folder where you're gonna add all of these order line items that you collected. So this is your old folder, quote line. We're going through each and every file in that folder, and then we are assigning it to a new folder. Think of it that way, and that really helped me visualize that. So I'm gonna now assign order line var to list of order line. So in this case, I'm now going to need a new resource again, and we're gonna do the same creation of variable. And this time it's also going to be a record, but this time it's going to be a multiple values because we're trying to assign everything to that one list. I'm going to say list of order line. Okay. And the object, of course, is order line or order item. I keep calling it order line. Okay, so order product. And now we're going to use, instead of equal to, we're going to say add. And what we're going to add, we're just going to add the thing that we just created before that, which is var list. And we can remove the dot, and because we're trying to add everything in that record into this list, so you can just remove the dot and it will work. Now I'm going to save this. Now before we go too far and activate it, it's always a good idea to debug your flow. And if there are any errors, you're going to see it. And I'm just doing this for the first time live. So let's see what this looks like. So I can choose a quote. I'm going to use this quote for my example. And I'm going to basically try to trigger the flow. Or we can also just say skip start condition. I just want to make sure it triggers. And hit run. Now let's see what happens. Okay, so it's really helpful to look at your debug log, even though it worked. If it worked correctly, it's always good to look at it if you're trying to learn. So I'm going to see what happened. It tried to query the quote line, successfully found records. Then it queried the contract, successfully found contract record. Then it tried to create order, and you can see it found the account ID that I put in, the start date or the effective date, and the status. And it is telling me a record is ready to be created when the next screen pause. And then it created the order ID. Order ID always starts with A01, so I know it's the order ID that would be created. Next thing it is doing is looping through the quote line. So this is what the list looks like. You can see here we have 0Q. All of these are individual quote line rows. So if I just copy this and go to my URL and paste that. Oops. it should take me to the quote line item. There we go. So it will take you through the first one, then it's doing the assignment. The first assignment, as we said, it is assigning the order ID that was just created over here, DIAZ, as you can see. Product 2 ID is the ID that it found in that quote line, and the price book entry ID. So that's the first assignment. Then it is then adding this whole thing into this list. I know this is not very clear, but it's basically adding those items to this list. Then it's going to the second item in that. So we have two things here. It has to loop through twice. Even though it says iteration 1, the first one is saying iteration 0. Every time you deal with a list, it will always start with 0. That's just general programming. Things always start with 0. They don't start at 1. So this is the iteration 1, which is really the second thing in that list. Same thing happens here, and you can see it's assigned. End loop. So now the loop has ended. Okay, we forgot to do one important step here. I'm just now realizing it. And we actually did not create the record, right? So that's important. So after you assign everything, we forgot the last piece of the puzzle is actually insert this list. So now we're going to do a create records and create order line from a record variable, which is true. We already have our record variable nice and ready to go. And we're going to do multiple this time because we're creating multiple lines. And you can use the record collection, this one. List of order line is the what we just assigned to. And let's hit save. And we're going to do the debug again, just for now. And now you should see some errors at least. So we already looked at everything from here, loop through. So create order line. It looks like there is some error. It is saying price book not set on order. Okay, so that's an easy mistake to make. Since I haven't worked with this object in a long time, we also have to set the price book on the order. So let's go back to our order where we created the order, and we're going to add price book ID here, and we can take our price book, let's see, hopefully from the code. Okay, so we got the price book ID there. Save that. I can totally edit this out, but I want to show you the way how you can also navigate through errors and know that nobody's perfect and everybody sees errors, and then we go back and fix it. So this time we got another error, which is saying that order products must have a unit price. Okay, what does that mean? That means we need to assign some more values in our order line, which we didn't do. So let's go back and add single order line and unit price. So for the unit price, I'm going to just say list price in this case. Okay, save this and let's run again. All right, now we need to add quantity. So what you can also do is, instead of having trial and errors there, you can just come to your order as well and add products right here and see what other things it needs. So I'm gonna add some products to my order, and quantity, just gonna say 2 and 3. In our case, we just want to copy this over from the quote line, but this is how you'd add it manually. Now that we have a manual creation, we can go to that thing and see what other things we need. Unit price is needed, quantity is needed. We already have the order ID created, product ID is already there. So I think we should be good after we add the unit quantity. So let's go back and assign that as well. I would love it if Salesforce just presets all the required fields so we don't have to go back and forth. So I'm going back to my single object line and going to add the quantity from the quote line, quantity. Let's do this again. Hopefully that works. Okay, so loop through it, create records. Now it is saying, yep, we are ready to create the order lines. And because it's ran in rollback, it didn't actually modify any records. So I think I feel good about this. I can now activate it now that I'm not getting any errors. I'm gonna activate this flow. Then we can go back to trigger this. So I'm here on a code and I'm going to try to trigger it by making it approved and save. I'm not seeing orders. Why would that be? Yes, so we missed another step here, or we missed a field on the order. So let's go back to our flow and go to the create order. As you can see, there is no linkage to the code, right? And that is why it is not showing on the code page. Now, this is very specific to how you have your object set up. If you needed to link it to the code, we have to do code ID equals the code that triggered this flow. So triggering code dot ID, code ID. Then we can save it as a new version. And now activate it. Let's try this again. Approved, save. Boom, there we go. So now we have the order created as we expected it to. I have the order start date, I have the order amount, and so on. And I also have order line items right there. Perfect. Hopefully that was helpful. I know this is a longer video, but I really wanted to make sure that I'm not only giving you the edited version and the final cut, but I wanted to show you how you can troubleshoot, go through the debug log, and figure out where the issues are. If you're not familiar with certain objects, the flow will tell you pretty quickly that you are missing some required fields, which is nice. You can always play around by creating the object from the user interface and then coming and playing around in the flow. It's always helpful if you know the objects very well to be able to do the tracker triggered flow without getting more errors. But even if you do get error, it's okay. You can go back and fix it. And that is the whole point of debugging and then activating and testing it. Please let me know if you have any questions and if you found this video helpful. I always appreciate and look for your comments. So thank you so much for watching.